What's up, everybody? The crew is back to break down UFC 319. We will be doing full card preview and predictions. But before we do it, we have some UFC news to cover. First of which, the UFC reaches an agreement with Paramount CBS Sports for a deal worth, or 7 years, worth $7.7 billion. Pretty crazy deal. The pay-per-view model seems to be going away. Not completely. I don't really know. But, Son, I know you had some opinions on this one, so let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it definitely makes more sense for your average consumer, I guess. I mean, you don't really have to be spending over $100 a month just trying to watch all the UFC events, right? I know a lot of other leagues like NFL, NBA, I think NFL mostly are being compared to this whole deal right now because it costs about north of $1,000 a year to watch that throughout the year. So definitely makes more sense. I think it definitely takes away a few of the viewers that are going to, any illegal streams or anything like that. So it definitely works out for the UFC. It definitely works out for the fans. I just kind of feel bad for Paramount's pockets right now.
Yeah, son, I think you hit on a lot of things that I really like. I think, talking to some of my coworkers that follow the UFC and, have been UFC fans for a while, they brought up a good point. If you think about like the other American major sports, you got football, basketball, baseball, you get all those, especially the big games on national television, your normal package, your YouTube TV, your Hulu Live TV, even in your cable. And I think this move puts the UFC, it's a big jump to that level of American sports. Obviously, it's gained popularity so much over the last 5 to 10 years, and I think that's just the next step here. I agree it's a lot of money for Paramount to be dishing out, but with, if we're getting UFC 300 on CBS, that's getting that many more viewers. I know even like college basketball finals had like 5 million viewers. I don't think we've ever had pay-per-view that high. So just the overall viewership and the popularity of the sport will continue to spread. So I think it's a great deal. We'll see how it plays out on both sides. But Dana White's, you saw the early morning cigar. He's very happy with this deal.
Yeah, I guess one last thing to touch on. I know Dana White did mention those one-off pay-per-views, and I imagine, like the card they're trying to put on at the White House, that has to be one of those. I know, Son, you touched on UFC Noche, and then, like your UFC 400s, maybe your UFC 350s, just historic events. But honestly, I'm fine with that. If you have to dish out $80 once or twice a year rather than 12 to 13 times a year, definitely less stressful on the pockets. And some of those events, like kind of do deserve to be, like as weird as it sounds, like deserve to be behind a pay-per-view wall. Like a fight on the White House lawn on the 250th anniversary of the 4th of July. Like, I get where Dana's coming from, trying to monetize that to the fullest. So, still, good job, Baldy. You did one right, and they don't have to oil you up.
Yeah. I like what you touched on, Luke. The sport of mixed martial arts seemed like it won. And, the fans, we win. The UFC gets a boatload of money, so it seems like all parties win, except maybe Paramount. That'll be seen later. But moving on, Fluffy Hernandez, what an absolute performance he put on last weekend, just putting a pace on Roman Dolidze and ultimately finding that submission by rear naked choke without even throwing in the boots. Ryan, I know you talked about the weaponized cardio of Fluffy. What were your thoughts on his performance and what's next for him?
Yeah, man. I mean, he looked great throughout the entire fight. Thought there was a weird little controversy at the end of round 2 where Herb Dean pushed him off, but that was because the bell sounded. Anthony Hernandez's corner, and Anthony Hernandez, jumped up, started cheering. Herb Dean had to clarify it's the end of the round. And, normally you see guys, a fighter like that, any fighter really will have like an adrenaline dump thinking they've won the fight. But Fluffy just went out on the round 3 and round 4 and continued to push that crazy pace and find himself a victory. And, he's riding an 8-fight win streak now, which is historic for the division in terms of the fact that he's probably not going to be fighting for a title next. He did just get bumped up the rankings to number 7, and he'll be the first guy in that division's history riding an 8-fight win streak that will not be fighting for a title. So it's clear Anthony Hernandez is probably one away, even though being ranked number 7. In terms of where you look, obviously Renier de Ridder at number 5. You have Sean Strickland at number 2 and Israel Adesanya at number 4. Any of those 3, I think, a win over them puts him in title contention, or he probably should be fighting for the belt next, depending on whether or not Nasruddin Imavov and Kyle Barajo is a snooze fest, or one of those guys just, barely squeaks out a win. And then I guess it also depends on the winner of this week's title fight between Dricus and Khamzat. Depending on the outcome of that, people are pretty scared if Khamzat gets the belt this week, how stagnant that division might become because, you're kind of used to only seeing Khamzat fight once a year. So, I don't know, man. Sky's the limit for Anthony Hernandez right now. He looked great, and I'm excited to see his next fight.
Yeah, I mean, nothing to add. I think you really touched on everything. Definitely going to be tough this weekend if Khamzat does win. That division definitely takes a hit there, but certainly some good contenders to take on Fluffy Hernandez towards the top of that division.
Yeah, the only thing I'm gonna add, I just think it's good for the division. Fluffy's an entertaining guy with his style, but definitely like off out of the octagon, his post fight or I guess his interview, like press conference, he was like, I just love violence. I got 4 joints rolled. That kind of personality, is always refreshed in the UFC. It's kind of like the old school UFC guys just going in, just love the violence, wants to fight a lot, 8-fight win streak. So good for the division and good for Fluffy. I hope he, I like Fluffy a lot. I hope he gets a title shot, in the upcoming fights.
Yeah, definitely. Just one hell of a performance. But moving on into the card, we start off with a flyweight bout between Idris versus Joseph Morales. To be completely honest with you guys, I'm not too in the know with either of these guys. I know Morales was in the UFC in his past, but again, not really too much film there to go off of for either. So Luke, Ryan, San, I don't know which one of you guys wants to take this one first, but the floor is yours.
Yeah, I can start off. I got Idris here. Just doing, like you said, don't know too much about these guys, but just doing some research came about that they both have pretty good wrestling. I think they kind of equalize that each other out there, and I think Idris just has a little bit better striking. It seems to be a little bit faster in the clips I watched, pretty good technically, and I just think he's going to output his way to a victory here. I don't think we get a finish in this first round or in this first fight of the night, so I'm taking Idris by decision. I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll be completely honest. I didn't know this fight was put on this card until you just mentioned it, Zach. But I see one guy's 10-0, the other one had a stint in the UFC. He went 1-2. I like the fresher guy here. The dark shadow as his profile is pretty ominous to me. So we'll go with the guy from Kazakhstan.
Yeah, I think Kazakhstan's always a safe bet, especially when you're kind of blind picking 2 fighters. They've had a good track record so far. Speaking of which, fucking whatever his name is, haven't seen him like in a while. He literally disappeared. What's his name? Shavkat Rakhmonov. Yeah, he literally fell off the face of the planet. So much so that I just forgot his name. Excited for whatever he's going to be doing, but that's all I got on this first fight. Nothing related to the actual fight itself, but.
All right, yeah. Kind of turning the tide from Shavkat there that you mentioned, Son. I'll side with you guys there. Just the guy who had a stint in the UFC was unsuccessful. Probably stepping in on short notice against a guy that the UFC would like to see win. At least that's kind of how I view it a little bit. So I'm on Idris as well. And moving on to the second bout of the evening, we have a women's flyweight match between Karine Silva, who is about a 2-1 favorite over Dion Barbosa. I don't know why I just kind of fumbled that 5 times. Regardless, besides the point, Ryan, I kind of made my point there. The floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, I'm going Karine Silva here. Before her last fight, she was on a pretty good tear within the UFC, pretty much proven she could do it anywhere. She had like 4 or 5 wins by submission, just going through like that submission win streak. And I just really haven't been impressed with Barbosa in this time. I mean, she's 2-1 in the UFC as of now and hasn't looked great. I'm going to go with the more well-rounded fighter here in Karine Silva.
Yeah, I agree. I'm right there with you, especially since, it is short notice for her opponent. I think Karine Silva is just getting a lot more prepared for this fight. She's going to have a lot more training time, a lot more camp time in there. And she was a favorite going into the Aldrich matchup. So, yeah, I'm going to side with the safer bet here and go Karine Silva.
Yes, and I like the point that you made calling out the short notice for Barbosa here. I think that's really the key for me. Obviously, the line is pretty close right now. I think it widens as we get close to the fight. But if you just look at Silva, she's definitely the heavier hitter. I wouldn't say she has the advantage striking, but definitely those strikes that she lands are going to be more impactful. In addition, she's a great grappler, obviously out of Brazil, fighting under the fighting nerds. they always seem to, produce not only good strikers, but good grapplers as well. And I know we always talk about MMA math doesn't work, but Barbosa got dominated in the grappling department by Miranda Maverick 2 fights ago, her last loss. So that's really the indication for me. I think Silva is going to be the aggressor here, and I think she gets it done rather easily.
All right, moving on. We have a middleweight matchup between Brian Battle and Milertine Ruziboyev. Brian Battle is a minus 180 or 170 favorite, which is definitely something to note there. And this fight is at middleweight after Brian Battle struggled to make welterweight in his last fight. I guess didn't even struggle, just flat out missed it. So that is something to note, as Brian Battle is usually looking huge going into the cage. But Son, enough said on my end. Wow, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of Brian Battle. Well, I say always. As soon as I found out about him, I can't say I watched his debut or anything like that, but he's definitely an exciting guy. Got some heavy hands. Definitely's got more well-rounded as the more fights he's taken. That France card really put him on the map. I think, as far as popularity wise, and I think that's really what made me a huge fan of him. And I don't know, I like his attitude. I like the way he fights. He brings it, as his name suggests. This dude gets in there and it's always a battle. So I'm riding that train. I'll take Brian Battle here, hopefully by finish. We'll see what he can do in the middleweight division.
Ryan?
Yeah, Son, I agree with you. I mean, Brian Battle is hit or miss. You ride the hype train, he had a great performance in France, and then he went out and he fought Randy Brown, and that was a pretty controversial split decision win on his part, and then next fight he misses weight by a pretty egregious amount. So tides kind of turned on Brian Battle, but skill-wise, heavy hands, used to be 300 pounds fighting at heavyweight, cut a shit ton of weight, moved back down to 170. And I think what it comes down to for me is while Nursultan Ruziboyev is bigger, his 3 fights ago against Joaquin Buckley at welterweight, Joaquin Buckley pretty much had his way with Nursultan, and so I don't think size is going to be too much of a factor here in terms, because Nursultan struggled against welterweights, while actually being originally a middleweight fighter, but moving down to that weight class, he got pretty much handled. So I don't think size will be an issue here for this one. So I'm going Brian Battle.
Yeah, I liked how you touched on size. I'm going Ruziboyev here because of the size. I feel, first of all, I can't believe Ruziboyev made 170. He's 6'5". Just mathematically, that doesn't make sense at all. And like you said, obviously Brian Battle not making the weight was concerning his last couple fights at welterweight. So I do think it's a good move up. But when you really watch Brian Battle, if he doesn't, if he's not having that much success on the feet, he normally kind of dominates in the grappling department, in the clinch and getting guys to the ground because he's normally bigger. I think this will be his first fight. I mean, he gives up a 4-inch height advantage. He actually has the reach advantage. I just think the overall size is going to be something that Brian Battle hasn't really seen. And I'm kind of just skeptical based off that Randy Brown fight. He came in heavier, and I thought Randy Brown should have won that fight. Obviously, Brian Battle had some aura behind him going in that fight, so I think that also swayed the judges a little bit, keep his streak going. I just think this is a little bit too much to handle right now, and I'm going with the bigger guy. I think physicality is going to come into play huge in this fight, and I have to give it to Ruziboyev. So I'm taking Ruziboyev here, going against the grain.
Yeah, I'm going to sway in the other direction. I'm actually going to go with Brian Battle here, and a lot of that is in the fact that I don't really trust Ruziboyev too much. I think Brian Battle, it is a good point that you bring up the physicality, Luke. I am curious to see how Brian Battle combats that and what he looks like in there. But I feel like Brian Battle can have the better in the grappling. And I feel like Ruziboyev's resume is a bit padded. You look at the number of submissions and knockouts he has and whatnot, and it seems like he just fought extremely weak competition. He hasn't really proven himself to me in the UFC yet. So I'm gonna side with Brian Battle on this one. But moving on, we have a lightweight bout between Edson Barbosa and Drakkar Klose. Barbosa right now is a minus 155 favorite, and Barboza is back up at lightweight. His last fight was down a weight class against Lerone Murphy, who's fighting later on in this card. And I like this matchup personally. You match up the two veterans. Edson Barbosa is definitely a lot bigger than Drakkar Klose, but this should be a fun one to watch. Watch these guys bite down on the I'm blanking on the word.
Mouth guard.
Yeah, the mouth guard, and just fucking throw some hands. But Luke, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm going Barbosa. I think, Barbosa kind of saved his career a little bit going down to 145. I think his power translated pretty well there, but also he fought like a lot of dogs down there. And I mean, even Lerone Murphy going to the decision, obviously it was a clean cut loss for him, but he put up a good battle. Then he's got wins against Yusuf and Billy Quarantino, those are formidable opponents. These are not, any slouches. And now he's going back up to 155 where the power should transfer even better than the drop down. And I think Drakkar Klose just has, he's chinny. I think, like you said, it's going to be a battle in there. They're going to bite down the mouthpieces and throw. But in his recent fights, he's been chinny. That last fight against Yoel Alvarez, he got demolished in that fight. And I think that's just a little skeptical going in. Obviously, it's been 7 months. He's definitely recovered. But Edson Barbosa can hit too, man. So I'm leaning Barbosa. I'm leaning Barbosa here. Sorry, I blanked on the last name. I thought I got it wrong. I'm taking him by KO. I think he gets it out of here.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Luke. I think the power will definitely be there, especially going back up to lightweight. I guess two things to note. One, I mean, he's 39 right now, but he's in incredible shape. He's a guy that's always been in incredible shape. And the other guy he's fighting, Klose, he's 37. And Edson Barbosa at 37 was knocking dudes out. Klose is having a tough time doing that. So I think he has kind of some of that really heavy durability that you kind of saw with Jose Aldo, a guy that's still fighting today, but just two guys that are kind of just from the same era, and I just think in my mind they're kind of similar in the terms of physicality and their durability, and I'm very excited. I do agree. I think there's a very good chance for a knockout here. Definitely hoping for it. And I expect this to be one of his last fights. I mean, he's 39. You can only go for so long. And feel happy with it. But I can definitely feel safe putting money on Barbosa this weekend.
Yeah, I'm gonna make that 3 for 3. I'm going Barbosa as well. I just look at, like you touched on, Luke's like resume. Even when he was at lightweight, he still has wins over guys like Beneil Dariush, Anthony Pettis, Dan Hooker. And then went on a few fight loss streak, decided to cut down to 145, and then just fought absolute monsters at the 145 weight division at featherweight, being up in age, cutting more weight than he's normally used to. You have Giga Chikadze, Bryce Mitchell, Lerone Murphy. Like, these are not bad losses to have on your resume by any means. These are just very tough guys. Then he bounces back, has good wins over Billy Quarantino, Sadiq Yusuf. And now, he's moving back up the weight class. The weight cut's not going to be as draining. And in terms of what you've seen in Drakkar Klose in his career, kind of just up and down, not nearly the same level of competition. His name kind of got put on the map from his fight with Beneil Dariush because they had a back and forth war. But then you remember overhand left, Beneil Dariush finishes him. I'm going with the guy who's just proven himself more inside the octagon in Edson Barbosa.
Yeah, I'll make that a sweep. I'm also going to go with Barbosa. One thing I will say is I like the fight to not go the distance. I think Klose maybe could potentially find a knockout as well and be able to put away Barbosa. I think this fight will be very physical, and you have a 37 and a 39-year-old in there that will throw. I do like that bet in general. But moving on, we have a lightweight bout between Chase Hooper and Alexander Hernandez. Hooper, the wicked grappler, is a minus 330 favorite. We know he's been on an absolute tear in the lightweight division. With all that being said, Ryan, let's hear your thoughts on this one first.
I missed it.
Hooper.
My bad. Hooper versus Alexander Hernandez.
Yeah, Hooper, young Jim Miller. I'm going Jim. I'm not going Jim Miller. I'm going Chase Hooper here. I don't know about the odds with this one. Like, he's almost like a 3-1 favorite.
Yeah, minus 330.
But ever since Chase Hooper kind of filled out, he's been on an absolute tear, man. I mean, like, you look at his wins. He's just getting more impressive every time, and I think moving up to lightweight was a good thing for him, and he can mix it up anywhere. We saw the striking when he fought Slava Claus. I forget the guy's real name, but I always remember the nickname. Borshev knocked him down in the first, then rode him out, ended up getting that TKO win. Submissions everywhere, very good, competent on the ground. And then in terms of Alexander Hernandez, his career, it's another one like we just touched on with Drakkar Klose. It's just been up and down, string some wins together. He has all the tools, to be a very good fighter, but you can never just seem to piece all of it together. And in terms of career trajectory, with Chase Hooper also being very young and seemingly like showing that and proving that he has the ability to put everything together, I'm going Chase Hooper on this one.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think Chase Hooper's definitely got the physical advantage as far as quickness, agility, and definitely grappling ability. I'm glad or it's kind of funny you bring up Jim Miller because Alexander Hernandez actually did beat Jim Miller. So this is kind of a get back fight for him. But, not too much to say here. Very confident. Obviously, the lines there, again, kind of don't really agree with it. But I'm going with young Gooner Hooper here.
Yeah, I'm right with you guys. Just love watching Chase Hooper fight. I mean, probably I'm using the word prospect here, but the best jiu-jitsu prospect definitely in the lightweight division. Obviously, you got guys like Charles Oliveira. I'm not considering him a prospect, but his jiu-jitsu is just next level. His flexibility is next level. It seems like every time you look away from one of his fights or go to the bathroom or grab a drink, he's got a guy on his back or doing something crazy on the ground. And when you think about Chase Hooper, like his initial fights in the UFC, it was the striking that was always the question. And he's really trued that up. I'm not saying he's a great striker by any means, but he's a lot more defensively sound. And, he does throw, he gets a couple combinations off in there where he's just landing, obviously not knocking guys out left and right, but he does land and he sets up the takedowns that much better. And you just look at Alex Hernandez, like the Damian Jackson fight, he was getting taken down by wrestlers that he shouldn't be getting taken down if you're going to pick him to beat Chase Hooper. I think Chase Hooper has the advantage on the ground that anything that Alex Hernandez does on the feet, it's just going to be null. I got Chase Hooper here. I don't think he gets him out of there, though. I do think Hernandez is a tough guy. In the vet, he's going to survive 3 rounds here. It's going to go to decision.
Yeah, I'll make that a sweep. I'll go Hooper as well. I will say like minus 330 is I don't really love that line, but I do think Hooper does. I mean, he obviously holds a big advantage in the grappling, and I will side with Chase Hooper. Moving on, we have a women's strawweight bout between Jessica Andrade, who is plus 125, against Lupita Godinez, who is minus 150. And Lupita does have good boxing, but I don't know if she's going to go in there and just beat Andrade's ass in the striking department. That will be seen. San, are you going to side with Andrade or Lupita on this one?
I'm definitely going with Andrade here. I like the underdog, especially in women's fights. I think a plus 100 something within that plus 200 range. I always like those odds. Those fights usually can go both ways, but this one I kind of don't see how she's an underdog. Obviously, Lupita's been doing pretty decent recently, but taking 2 losses before her last win was kind of tough. Of course, she's fighting Mackenzie Durham and Jen Jiroba, but still not too impressed with those performances. Jessica, on the other hand, just historically, I have been very impressed with her output. She does have heavy hands. She has really good striking. If anything, this is a very exciting striking bout between these two because they both have good hands. So I'm excited to see the exchanges they have. But with that, I'm going with Jessica Andrade here. I think, she's just got that tenacity. I mean, you see her in there, and she's looking like a male's flyweight throwing hands. She's pretty serious in there. So definitely excited to watch this one.
Yeah, Son, I am going to side with you. This was a tough one for me just because, like you touched on, like the 2 arcs of these women's careers. Like Andrade obviously was a champ, fought at the top for a while. Now she's kind of on a skid, kind of hasn't looked great at all in her recent fights. But I agree, man. Like you remember the Andrade of old, who was just dominant and hit harder than most women did it in the division at the time. And you have Lupita, who obviously has skidded previously, but overall has probably looked better as of late than Andrade. But I feel like every time Andrade fights, I'm always betting on her, and I'm not going to change that now. I think Lupita runs into a brick wall here, and Andrade shows why she once held the belt at this division.
Yeah, Luke, I'm glad you mentioned the belt aspect too, because I was pretty torn between both these fighters. And then, like you said, I remember that slam KO she had against Rose Namajunas in her prime to get the championship belt, and then her fight skid was fighting Zhang Weili and then Rose Namajunas again. You know what I mean? Like you can't. Before that, when she fought for the belt, before that it was Joanna Jędrzejczyk, like the best of the best that division's ever had to offer. And I just love seeing women like that, even fighters like that, who have competed with the best of the best, showing that they can hang. Whereas Lupita Godinez has not fought the best of the best in the competition, is on that 2-fight skid, was able to bounce back and get a win. Good for her. But I just don't see a reason why Jessica Andrade should be anything as an underdog in this fight. So it almost just forces me to take Jessica Andrade in this one. So, boost your parlays a little bit, maybe throw in like a 3-legger, don't do anything too crazy with it. But Jessica Andrade as an underdog here, I think that's free money.
Yeah, I like the value on Andrade as well, and that's why I'm going to side with her. I do view this as a 50-50 here. Lupi, she does have better like pure boxing than Andrade, but when you mix in everything else, I can see Andrade having a lot of success. I could see the volume being there, and at plus 125, I'm going to have to side with her. And moving on, we have a middleweight bout between GM3 and Michal Oleksiejczuk. Michal Oleksiejczuk is a minus 225 favorite over GM3. And this one is going to come down to whether GM3 can get him down and potentially find a submission, as Oleksiejczuk doesn't have the greatest grappling at all. But on the other side, Oleksiejczuk has been training with the fighting nerds. He's definitely been shoring up on the grappling. So it's a very interesting matchup here. And Luke, I believe you're next in line to start us off. So let's hear what side you're going with.
Yeah, I'm going GM3 by sub. I think this is a textbook Meerschaert play here. I can't believe the line is this, wide at this point. Obviously, Oleksiejczuk has the standing, advantage. He's a better striker. We saw him rock Kevin Holland. He's been in there with some good guys and, has gone toe to toe. But he has 6 sub losses in his professional career, and now he's fighting one of the best submission artists in this division. I don't see a way that Meerschaert gets KO'd. I think he was one of the guys who got KO'd by Khamzat early, right? It's like that one of Khamzat like second or third fight. I don't see that happening here. I see him, being able to hang on the feet enough to set up a takedown, and once he gets to the ground, I don't think it gets back up. I think he finishes him within his first takedown. So yeah, I'm going GM3 by sub. I think that's an easy play here. I think that's going to be crazy odds for a guy who has done it so many times in the UFC career.
Luke, I am glad you mentioned it because I thought I was going to be crazy coming onto this podcast and saying I'm taking GM3 as well. I mean, you pretty much nailed everything I was going to say right on the head. I guess the only thing I'll add to that is I was very impressed, and I know I shit-talked Reinier de Ridder after his fight with GM3, but it's simply because of how well GM3 before the sub, in rounds 1 and 2, how he handled himself in the octagon, which is now we see is Reinier de Ridder might be, a guy that could potentially win a belt in this division. And even though GM3's 37 years old, was like, 36 at the time, he put on a great pace against Reinier de Ridder, and I was very impressed with his performance in that. And I think he could do something similar, if not better, to Michal Oleksiejczuk in this one.
Yeah, I am kind of second guessing myself because you guys are picking him too. But I'm going GM3. I hate this. We're picking a lot of underdogs together here, which usually doesn't go well for us, historically speaking. But I think you guys said it all. I mean, the submission threat is very real. I was on GM3 against RDR. I thought he was going to win. I bet on him. He definitely had a chance, but he lost by submission. And after that, he got 2 submissions in a row. And then came back and lost to a decision to Brad Tavares, which I don't think is bad. It's not like he got finished or anything. So I definitely, a guy like Brad that put a lot of hands on him that fight too. There was a lot of strikes thrown his way. And I think that just shows, he can survive those. He can survive those battles. He can survive those punches. And I think it's just really setting him up, like you said, Luke, for a classic GM3 submission here. And I think this line's great. I mean, I love it. I'm going to be all over it this weekend. I think it's just like it doesn't make sense. And there's just too much of a threat in GM3 to a guy that's too, vulnerable to those submission threats to not bet on him. So I'm with GM3 here along with you guys.
Yeah, fuck history. I'm also going with GM3 here. That is a sweep. I like the value here on GM3. I think getting Oleksiejczuk down to the ground once will be all it takes, like you touched on, Luke. But I will say, if I am betting it, the most likely thing I am to bet, depending on the odds, is probably the fight not to go the distance. I think if Oleksiejczuk is going to win, it's going to be by knockout. I think you can find it at any point during the fight. If GM3 gets him down to the ground, I think GM3 will likely find a submission. So it's like if it stays standing the whole time, I think we'll see a knockout. If he gets him down, I think we'll see a submission. So I'm curious to see what the odds are on that. I haven't actually checked yet, but that's where my mind goes as far as the gambling perspective goes. But moving on, we have a lightweight bout between King Green and Diego Ferreira. King Green is the slight underdog. We have 2 Unks sitting here battling it out. It should be a fun one. I know King Green got put out cold earlier this year when he fought Mauricio Rufy. Diego Ferreira is not Mauricio Rufy, but we shall see what happens. Can King Green's chin hold up, San? I'll let you answer that one first.
I don't think so. I've not been a huge fan of Bobby Green as of late or over the past few years. And he definitely is chinny, which is a problem because, you see a guy like Diego and it's like, oh, this guy's super old, right? He doesn't have any power. But let's look back. I mean, in 2024, he KO'd Rebecca. In 2023, he KO'd Michael Johnson. So two, pretty serious guys that just 2 years ago got knocked out by Diego. And now Diego's fighting a guy that has been very, very chinny and just took a very bad spinning back heel kick from Rufy that, everybody and their mother saw online. So I'm going Diego. I can definitely see a KO here. I think that's a very valid play. But I don't think there's much else to say from my side. I'm going Diego here.
Yeah, Son, I agree with you. I'm going Diego as well. It's when King Green sort of made his resurgence when he beat Tony Ferguson by sub, and then he had that wicked 30-second KO against Grant Dawson, who's another major prospect in the UFC. His name kind of got put back up on the map. Then he gets that brutal KO loss to Jalen Turner, which obviously not his. It is his fault. He got caught, but then the ref let that go on way too long. Took so much unnecessary damage in that fight. I was very surprised at UFC 300 when he was able to go back, and put a pace on Jim Miller and win that fight very decisively at UFC 300 against Jim Miller. But then you remember, again, Jim Miller was, 41 years old at the time of that fight. So, old age just coming to show, it always hurts. Then gets subbed by Patty in a pretty brutal loss. He was out for a while. Once again, the ref kind of did him no favors. That submission was held fairly long. And then spinning back kick, brutal knockout to Mauricio Huffy. Diego Ferreira, on the other hand, very aggressive fighter, is going to put it all out there, whether or not he's winning or losing, has tremendous power, overhand right against Michael Johnson, knocks him out cold, puts a pace on Rebecca that Rebecca had never seen before, being a rising prospect. And Diego Ferreira was 40 or 39 years old at the time, drags him in the deep waters in round 3 and eventually finds that KO finish. His last fight against Grant Dawson didn't go his way, but that's because Grant Dawson, unlike the Bobby Green fight he had, was able to actually, get his game plan going. And I think it would have been a very similar result had he fought Bobby Green if he didn't get knocked out in 30 seconds. I'm going Diego Ferreira here. I think it's going to be the same thing. Very aggressive, putting on a pace. It's going to look more favorable in the judges' eyes. And if not, with the way things have been going with Bobby Green's career as of late, we'll probably see a finish in the later rounds. Let's say 2 or 3.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you guys. I'm going on Diego as well. I think really not much to add. You guys touched on Bobby Green. Definitely higher competition as of late, but that doesn't matter as much if you're getting brutally knocked out. And 5 months after that Rufy knockout is just kind of crazy to me. Obviously he's up in age, so he's trying to get as much fights in the UFC as he can and get that money. And I opposed to you, Son, I do like Bobby Green. I think he's a fun personality. I just think this is the kind of fight, like you guys touched on, that is not set up well time-wise for him and with his opponent. I've been impressed with Diego Ferreira recently, as you guys touched on, the Rebecca comeback win, and also his knockout of Michael Johnson, who now, just had a huge win against El Huber, definitely back in, the swing of things in that division. So, yeah, I think you guys touched on it. I think Diego just has a little bit too much to handle in the pressure, and also the slight risk of grappling is just going to be too much for Bobby Green. But with that being said, we could be sitting here on Monday recapping this fight and Bobby Green pull some crazy knockout out of his pocket like we've seen him do in the past. But my pick's Diego Ferreira.
Yeah, well said, boys. I don't have anything really to add there. I'm also on Diego. So let's move on to the flyweight division to open up this pay-per-view. We have Tim Elliott versus Kaya Sakura. Kaya Sakura is making only his second fight in the UFC after fighting Pantoja for the belt not too long ago. So there's not really too much to go on as far as Kaya Sakura goes. You can watch the tape, but then it is against lower-level competition, so it's kind of tough to gauge exactly where he fits into the fold as far as the top of this flyweight division goes. And then you look on the other side of this one, you have Tim Elliott, who is a big underdog. He's always been a very solid fighter, but he hasn't fought in over a year and a half. I believe now it's coming on 20 months or so. So it's been a long time that Tim Elliott has been out of the octagon. a lot of doubts, not even doubts, but a lot of question marks surrounding Tim Elliott. So, Ryan, with that being said, I'm curious to hear if you are going with your guy, Kaya Sakura.
I am going with Tim Elliott on this one, boys.
Wow.
Whoa.
I think Tim Elliott poses a style of fighting, and I know it's been described before. It's just weird, right? Like this guy, you know, he mixes it up in such a strange way, and unless like you're super high caliber, it's very hard to deal with. People forget like he fought Muhammad Mokaev, and while he did get subbed in the third round of that fight on the judges' scorecards, he was winning that fight on 2 of those judges' scorecards, 2-1. So he would have ended up winning that fight had it gone to a decision. And it was simply because even though he was on his back for the majority of that fight, he was just, you know, he was showing Mokaev things he's never seen before, leaning up, throwing elbows, slicing Mokaev open, and things like that he's been able to do his entire fight. And also the grappling. He's a very competent grappler. And the one, you know, what was Kaya Sakura's downfall in that Pantoja fight? It was the grappling. You know, went out in round 2, got subbed, got taken down in round 1. And unless there have been such significant improvements to Kaya Sakura's grappling defense and wrestling defense, I have a feeling that if Tim Elliott can weather a storm in round 1, he can turn the tides of this fight if it's not going his way, and maybe find a submission win or ride out a pretty comfortable decision. It's just too hard to tell, you know. You see, and we'll touch more on this as the fight, you know, as we break down some of these other fights, but there's not enough tape on Kaya Sakura for me to have him be sitting at a minus 250 favorite in the UFC right now. So I'm going Tim Elliott.
While I do agree with the odds, I aggressively disagree with your decision going with Tim Elliott here. I think Kaya Sakura's got everything going for him. You know, obviously he just fought against Pantoja, who was, you know, probably one of the best flyweights ever, right up there with DJ, Mighty Mouse. But I think Kai's got everything going for him. I mean, he's very crisp on the feet. He's got the age. He's 7 years younger than him. He's got the reach. He's got the height. Not by much, but he's got the height. And, you know, you don't just get a title fight straight up coming into the UFC if you're not a very proven fighter. And Kaya Sakura really is, man. I mean, if you go back and see what he was doing out in Japan, it was pretty spectacular. He's very dominant. And I'm just very excited for what's coming out of Asia recently. We've been seeing a lot of fighters out of Korea, very exciting. A lot of fighters out of Japan, very exciting, especially recently on that last card. So I want to keep that rolling. I think we need a guy like Kaya Sakura to challenge for that flyweight title again, because I think he can, and he's in his absolute prime right now at 31 years old. So with an impressive win here, I think he's, you know, looking right back up in the rankings, and soon, if he keeps it rolling, could get another title fight.
Yes, Sean, I'm with you. I'm on Kaya Sakura here. Ryan, I do like how you touched on Tim Elliott and his grappling ability, but I'm not going to start by comparing him to Pantoja, who I think is the best. I know Mighty Mouse is a really good grappler, but I think Pantoja might be a better grappler in the UFC alone in their time in the UFC. He's just been so dominant, and for you to get subbed by Pantoja and then fight Tim Elliott, I think you do have a little bit of confidence. And the thing of that Pantoja fight, I was so impressed with. I feel like every time I watch Pantoja fight, he's always the quicker guy. I thought Asakura was quicker than Pantoja in that fight. He caught him. I forget if it was a kick or a knee early that looked like it did a lot of damage. Obviously, Pantoja has like the Man of Steel chin. But I think the speed is just going to be on full display. I think he's going to be hitting Tim Elliott with things that he's never seen at a speed that he's never seen. I think this guy's run, like you touched on, Stan, is just getting started. And you got to imagine, yeah, he's not as well of a grappler. We know that, but he's been training that. That's what he's been focusing on. He's a top level striker already. So I think we're just going to see an Asakura showcase here. I think he's going to dominate. I don't know at this division if he's going to get him out of there. But I'm taking the younger guy. I'm taking a guy who's been in the octagon recently, not 2 years off. I'm going Asakura here by decision.
Yeah, before I get into my pick, Son, I think you said that Pantoja's up there as like a flyweight GOAT with Mighty Mouse. And I hear people talk about this. I will say, before I say anything, or I will say now, 7 damn defenses away from tying Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. Like, I've been hearing that argument floated around, so I just wanted to point that out. That's a lot of fucking defenses to go.
I fully agree. I think, in my opinion, you know, which means, you know, basically nothing in the MMA community, I sincerely think that, you know, Demetrius Johnson is the greatest UFC fighter to ever step in that cage. I mean, even when you know, I think John Jones, thanks God every day that he made Mighty Mouse tiny. Because if he was his size, I don't think, skill, speed, ability in general, just nobody can touch him. He's just spectacular. But yeah, moving on. Just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, but I just had seen people talking about that, so I just wanted to mention that. But Kai Sakura, yes, that is my pick as well. The one thing that really deterred me from Tim Elliott is the fact that he hasn't fought since December of 2023. That's a long time. What has he been doing with all that time? I'm not sure. I will say the wrestling of Tim Elliott does scare me a little bit for Kai Sakura. But like you touched on, Luke, I think Kai Sakura's speed is going to speak volumes, and I favor him as well. I think it'd be better for the UFC if he won in general. So, yep, I'm going Kai Sakura. Now, moving on, we have a fun middleweight bout between Jared Cannonier and Michael Venom Page. Michael Venom Page is coming in at near a 2-1 favorite over Jared Cannonier, which I find interesting because there is a blueprint to beat Michael Venom Page, and that involves grappling. Like if Jared Cannonier can get him in the clinch and he's very physical with him, and if he can get him down on the ground, I could see Jared Cannonier winning this fight. And he is a guy that has fought at higher weight classes before, so he is a big middleweight. And on the flip side of that coin, Michael Venom Page, we see him do it to almost everyone. His style of striking is just so confusing. No one fights like Michael Venom Page. So I can definitely see the route to victory for both of them, but being a 2-1 favorite, I don't know if I agree with those odds. What do you think on that, Luke?
Yeah, I'm all over MVP here. I think this is a perfect stylistic matchup for him, especially being, I know it's hard to say when the younger guy because he's 38, to Cannonier's 41, but I think he fights at a younger style. I think he's going to be bouncing around the whole fight like he always does, and he's a mystery man. I mean, we compare him to Wonder Boy all the time, very similar styles, but when you see them fight, MVP looks like the younger guy compared to Wonder Boy. I think it's just going to be a riddle in there. And Cannonier, although I love him, I think, his career has been great to watch. Obviously fluctuating through, I think, 3 different weight classes through his career. I just think this is, it's the opposite of RoboCop, who he fought last, who's going to stand there. He's going to be hittable. I think every time he gets hit, MVP is out of the way before the next strike comes, the counter strike. So yeah, just that pure aspect. I do like that you touched on the grappling and the clinch. Cannonier is definitely probably the more physically gifted man, but he's got to catch him. And I think we're going to be sitting here watching this fight in round 3 because I don't think it ends in a knockout. And we're going to see a frustrated Cannonier because he's just not going to be able to find where MVP is or predict his next move or corner him, in parts of the cage. So yeah, I think this line is actually, well lined up at this point in time. I think MVP should be around a 2-1 favorite here, and I think he gets it done.
Yeah, I fully agree with you there, Luke. Sorry, Ron, I know you're about to jump in. But I think MVP's got all the things that you need to beat Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier's got crazy reach, at 77.5 inches, which is pretty considerable. And that's one of the things that he uses to his advantage the most in the fights. He's not, a crazy grappler. He's not really going for those grapples. But MVP's got the reach advantage there. He's also got the height advantage, making it a little bit tougher for Cannonier to catch him. And he's just so quick. I think his strikes are really quick. He fights very methodically. And MVP is going to be able to find those shots. And Jared Cannonier, who, isn't known for his, striking defense or anything like that, although he does stay on the feet a lot. So I think MVP's got everything going for him. Luke, I love what you said. I mean, I think he's going to be catching him with things that, he's not really prepared to defend against. And he's going to be bouncing around. It's going to be tough for Jared to catch him. I think it's a very strong decision win and very decisive decision win for MVP here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you, Zach. I like the point you made about, we've kind of seen the blueprint to beating MVP. Ian Gary did it about 1.5 years ago at the welterweight division. My thing is I just don't see Jared Cannonier implementing that aspect of his game. Even while he does have it, he doesn't use it. He really does, besides maybe cage control in the clinch, but he doesn't take you down and hold you there. While he can, he's done it. He did it earlier in his UFC career at heavyweight and light heavyweight. Once he got to middleweight, that all sort of stopped. We haven't seen it since. And I don't know. I feel like MVP just gets like these crazy favorable matchups. Even if the guy with the last name is Magomedov, who you somehow know just isn't going to shoot a single takedown, and he outstruck Sharaput and Magomedov pretty convincingly. And I think that's what you see in a lot of the case of Jared Cannonier's losses, whether it be to Cabrajo. That fight didn't really touch the ground a lot, but he was just outstruck and outmatched on the feet. Israel Adesanya outstruck, outmatched on the feet. Sean Strickland, people argue that split decision. It could have gone either way, but it was very close in terms of just the striking, never really touched the ground. And I think if any either of those guys get a takedown, that fight's clear in one way or the other. And I know their corners are telling them that, but Cannonier doesn't do it. So I think you're going to see, like you said, Luke, a very frustrated Cannonier in round 3 trying to get his game plan going, but he's just going to be touched up by MVP this entire fight. Just in and out of range, dealing with that reach disadvantage. It's going to be very tough for him. The only other thing I'd say that power is the great equalizer in all fights, and Cannonier can crack. So there is a case where Cannonier, but it's also, it's just like a strike of lightning, it only happens once where he can potentially crack MVP. But overall, 9 times out of 10, I think MVP wins this one.
Yeah, I'm going to side with MVP as well and make that a clean sweep. But Cannonier is a live dog in this fight, I will say. And if he has any brain, he will go out there and try to impose his physicality and wrestle him early. Whether he does that or not, chances are probably not. But yeah, I'm gonna side with MVP. Moving on, we have a welterweight bout between Jeff Neal, the oh-so durable, and Carlos Prates, looking to get back in the win column after that loss to Ian Machado Gary. Son, I know you're a big Fighting Nerds fan, so I'll let you take it from here. Are you riding with Carlos Prates to get back in the win column?
Yeah, I wish I would have remembered. I would have worn my Fighting Nerds hoodie for this occasion. I'm definitely siding with Carlos Prates here. I think I was on him for the Ian Gary fight. He had a very, very close last round, almost finished him. He definitely could have had he not gassed out. I think that's definitely one of the things that they've been working on coming in. I can't imagine a smart team like the Fighting Nerds didn't address that issue. And, I think, obviously this is a rebook for these two guys because they're supposed to fight for that Ian Gary fight. But even then, I can't see, Jeff Neal beating Carlos here. I think the striking is very much in Carlos's advantage. It's definitely on his side. He's a lot younger, and I still think he can make a title run despite the Ian Gary loss. I think that's definitely a rematch we'll see in the future. And I'm just very high on the Fighting Nerds in general. I think that Jim's spectacular. I know Coach Lupita, he's a great coach. He really, it's just crazy the system they got going over there with all the stats and everything and all the research they do on their opponents. So I don't see a world where a guy like Jeff Neal, who has a lot of UFC looks, not being just dismantled by a guy like Carlos Prates, who's got, that team basically doing fight research for him. So I'm very, very heavily favoring Carlos here with a knockout.
Yeah, Son, I agree with you. I guess I will say, when the fight first got announced and he was supposed to be fighting Jeff Neal, I was on Carlos Prates then, and then obviously, and I like you touch on the research. It's almost to me like while you look at a fighter who's coming up on short notice, is that being a disadvantage? With the amount of research and, training the Fighting Nerds put into specific, to each matchup and their specific opponents, fighting Ian Gary on short notice for 5 rounds, I could argue almost hurt Carlos Prates in a way, as he didn't have the time to actually just study full out Ian Gary, train for Ian Gary, spar with guys who fight like Ian Gary, stuff like that, which is why the Fighting Nerds have been so good and have been so successful in the UFC. The other thing that really impressed me of Carlos Prates' fight against Ian Gary, while it was a loss, was the fact that while being a chain smoker in the 5th round, I still think this, it gets brought up every now and then, especially when Carlos Prates' name comes up. He was like probably 1 or 2, maybe 3 or 4 well-placed shots, with the final seconds left in that 5th round, while, being a pack-a-day smoker, showing off that cardio somehow to finishing Ian Gary in that fight. So cardio doesn't concern me anymore. It always used to. I was always worried about what he'd do if he ever had to fight for a title or get into a 5-round main event. But I see him, he already had like 6 weeks of camp training for Jeff Neal, make it another 8 weeks on top of that when this fight got announced. I think you'll see something very similar to his last KO win, which was against Neil Magny.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I'm on Prates here. Just think it's a ideal bounce back situation for him. Obviously you guys touch on the prospect that he is Fighting Nerds, the whole 9. I can't see a world where, Jeff Neal gets this done just because of how good Prates is in terms of when he's prepped, that whole team, like you guys touched on. I'm not going to, spend too much time on it. I do think this will be fight of the night. I think Jeff Neal will put out a good showing, and we've seen Prates, weather the storm with Ian Gary. I do think they kind of have similar styles. They both want to stand and bang. They mix up the striking pretty well. I think there's just one huge difference, and it's that Carlos Prates has the death touch. And when he seems to land those shots, people go to sleep. Even like you guys touched on in the Ian Gary fight, a couple strikes away from getting Ian Gary out of a fight that, Ian Gary held pretty well throughout all 5 rounds. I got nothing more to add. I think it's just a perfect bounce back spot. I am going to get him out of here. I think the death touch is back and the fighting nerds are back in the win column through Prates. I know obviously Rufy just won. But yeah, I'm excited for this one. This is going to be fight of the night in my book.
Yep, I'm also on Carlos Prates, so another sweep for us boys. For good or for bad, we shall see. But yeah, for all the points you guys just touched on, Carlos Prates does have that death touch. I will say Jeff Neal is very tough. Jeff Neal is durable, so I don't think Prates puts him away early. But Prates is very patient. He's very selective with his shots, and I think the opening will come at some point throughout 3 rounds, and he will get Jeff Neal out of there. Now, moving on to our co-main event, we have Lerone Murphy taking on Aaron Pico. Aaron Pico making his UFC debut. I know he is a very, very good wrestler. Growing up, did not go to college for it, Luke, like you did point out when we last touched on him. But Pico also, like while watching my film on him, Pico also does have good boxing, and he throws fucking hard. And on the other side, Lerone Murphy is very difficult and very frustrating for a lot of people to fight. So for Aaron Pico to be fighting Lerone Murphy in his UFC debut, that's a tough matchup. And being a big favorite that Aaron Pico is, I mean, I just don't know if he really should be. So with all that being said, Luke, I want to hear your thoughts on this one first.
Yeah, this was the only fight in my notes that I left a question mark and didn't pick someone before. Yeah, the myth of Aaron Pico in the UFC, I think we talked about it when he was supposed to fight, what's the guy's name? Yeah, Ivoilev, whatever, however you say it. And looking back on it, I was very skeptical, but I think this is obviously a better matchup for Aaron Pico, and kind of swayed me in his way earlier this week on Sunday morning. Me and my roommate were watching Bedtime MMA's YouTube channel, and he called Lerone Murphy the smaller Leon Edwards. So it kind of threw me for a loop because I was like, that's not really a great comp, even though he is a former champ. But if you look at Lerone Murphy, man, he's dominant in the UFC. There's not much more you could say. He's been in there with some of the best guys. He's at the top of that weight class for a reason. And it goes back to our old saying on the show, like how many times do a guy have to come in the UFC and lose to a high ranked UFC guy before we fully just bet on anyone coming into the UFC to lose. So that's where I'm going here. I'm going Lerone Murphy. I think he's just a warrior, man. You watch his fights, even when he gets taken down, he seems to always get back up. When he gets rocked, he always seems to weather the storm and end up victorious. And obviously Aaron Pico, great wrestling, has very good power behind his strikes and is a good boxer. I just think Lerone Murphy's been there. He's done that. And this is no different. There's no pressure on him here. And another win under his belt puts him right in the conversation to fight for the title soon. So I'm going Lerone Murphy.
I'm glad we're getting some different picks here. I was afraid we were going to, keep sweeping this whole card. So I am with that. I am going with Aaron Pico here. I agree with you fully. I mean, Lerone Murphy is tried and true and has been in the UFC since, I don't know, like 2020, 2019. So he's had a very long tenure in the UFC and a very successful tenure in the UFC. But he is, kind of decision hunting almost in my eyes. It's not like he's not going for the finishes, but I think there's definitely some opportunities in his past fights that he could have finished, and he didn't. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he, not scared. I'll never say a fighter's scared, but I think he's a lot more calculated in going for those decisions, which is kind of what, in my eyes, we started seeing with Paulo Costa, for example, a guy that obviously got finished a few times, but he was started to go for those decisions, and it didn't really go his way. And that's just the tough thing I'm seeing with Lerone Murphy. Of course, early in his career, earlier in his UFC career, he was getting a decent amount of finishes, but now he's kind of plateaued towards that, unanimous decision, area in his past, few years even. Not a single finish from him. So, and Aaron Pico is a guy that, he's knocking guys out left and right. He throws, like you said, Zach, very heavily. It's like he's got bricks taped to his hands. And he's exciting, and he's 28. So now is like, this is kind of like the Patricio Pitbull coming in his prime in the UFC, which is kind of what we wanted to see back then, which we didn't get, but we did get Aaron Pico. So I'm going to continue my streak of picking these new guys coming in from Bellator and coming in from One and wherever the hell else. Maybe I'll eat my words this weekend, but I'm very excited to see Aaron Pico perform in the UFC, as long as he can keep his cool and not get, blinded by the bright lights.
Yeah, fuck, dude. You both make great points. I like you touched on, it's question mark on this fight. I was torn between it all week, but in like everything told me like lean Lerone Murphy. And I think what it comes down to is I was like, I really like Patchy Mix. And then, Patchy Mix went out and did whatever the hell you want to call that. And I'm just like thinking, I'm looking back, it's okay. Yeah, you have Patchy Mix, he didn't look the best. At least Patricio Pitbull looked like he wanted to fight. That was cool. You have Kaya Sakura coming from Ryzen. He fought Alexander Pantoja. So, there's all these asterisks on these guys coming in, but it's just enough of a sore spot, in my mind where like I just can't take them. And credit to Aaron Pico. He's an Olympic caliber wrestler. He didn't go the college route. He went straight to Olympic World Tryouts and I think he lost by like maybe 1 point that he gave up in the last few seconds of the third period that stopped him from, making the Olympic team. So the wrestling's there. He's filthy. He is that type of caliber guy. And then instead of going to college, like I said, he just said, fuck it, I'm an MMA fighter now. This is what we're doing. But I just can't get my head around Bellator guys or anyone else, Had Aaron Pico fought in the Dana White Contender Series and got some crazy finish, or even like a very good win on the Contender Series and is now fighting Lerone Murphy in his UFC debut, I would probably be leaning the other way and picking Aaron Pico in this one. But the trend that we've seen so far with these Bellator guys, other guys coming in from different organizations, I just can't lean it, especially seeing that Lerone Murphy's the underdog in this fight, which wasn't the case before. I was thinking, these Bellator guys are going to be sleepers on picks because they're coming in as underdogs. I got to go the other way here. Lerone Murphy being an underdog seems free to me, so I'm taking Lerone Murphy.
Yeah, I've said this in the past that I would not pick any of these guys coming over from these other big promotions into the UFC. I won't be picking them, but I'm just going to eat crow, and I am picking Aaron Pico here. I think the wrestling is very big, but one thing is Aaron Pico doesn't have a good win in his career, and these other guys who have moved over have been champs in these other promotions. Aaron Pico hasn't been a champ, but again, like you touched on, Son, Aaron Pico is very young. He is in his prime. I know he's out there in California training with Coach Cal with Khamzat and Armin Sarukian right now, so they have one hell of a group there. He's going to be in shape. He's going to be able to go 15 minutes hard. I just think that Lerone Murphy may frustrate Aaron Pico on the feet, and I'm hoping that Aaron Pico's wrestling will be enough to offset the frustrations that he does receive from Lerone Murphy. And like I said before, like he does throw good boxing combinations. He throws hard, so he seems to have all facets of the game, like some of these other Bellator guys have not. So with all that being said, I am going to side with Aaron Pico and make that a 2-2 split. And now moving into the main event, we have DDP at plus 190 taking on Khamzat Chimaev at minus 235. And one more thing to note before we give our picks here, we will have Dan joining with us to give a high-level breakdown of this fight. He's been working on an article that will be coming out soon. Not sure when exactly, but at some point this week. But we're going to go through our picks, and then Dan's going to give his breakdown just so we have some sort of cadence there and you guys know what's coming. But moving back into this fight, DDP plus 190 versus Khamzat Chimaev minus 235. And this is one of the fights that I am most excited for thus far this year. It's a very unpredictable title fight. A lot of people are making it out to seem, can DDP weather the early storm and coast to a decision? Me, on the other hand, I don't think that is really a truthful narrative as far as Khamzat Chimaev goes. A lot of people talk about his gas tank like it's some big problem. If you go back and watch his fight with Kamaru Usman, he didn't gas out in the third round. The output wasn't as crazy as in the first round, but he was not gassed out. You look at the fight with Gilbert Burns, he won round 3 on all judges' scorecards to win that decision. So the gas tank narrative is annoying me a little bit, but DDP is so goddamn weird, and he is big and strong for the weight class. So this is just a huge question mark in my eyes. But Luke, I've said enough about this fight already. I want to hear your opinion on this one first.
Yeah, I know we've been texting about this one for quite a while, and I part of me almost didn't want to go first, but I obviously will go first. I'm going Khamzat Chimaev here. I love DDP. I think he's one of those guys that he just keeps on winning and keeps on saying funny things on the mic in the interview, where you have to like him. Even though I didn't like him when he knocked out Whitaker, I was pissed about that. I liked Robbie Whitaker a lot. But I think it's weird. It's like this destiny thing for Khamzat here. I feel like from the first time he stepped foot in the UFC octagon, people have been talking about him being a champ. And we're finally here after, all the sicknesses, all the struggles to get fights lined up. And then I don't know what's up with the sanctions and stuff like that. It seems like that's kind of all past. And we're seeing a Khamzat that's, finally ready for that title fight. I think you kind of touched on it, Zach. Everyone that fights DDP seems to not be able to figure him out. He's a very confusing fighter. He throws weird combos. He's got great grappling. He had that problem with the gas tank in the fights against like Darren Hill. And then you see him after he gets the nose surgery, seem to be a complete different fighter that can go all 5 rounds and has with, the likes of Sean Strickland and I think 4 rounds with Izzy. I think one thing that's really putting me in Khamzat's direction, I think he's a better striker, which I think is super surprising for people to hear and people to think about. But we're forgetting like his first couple fights in the UFC, he was just knocking dudes out. Like we talked about Meerschaert getting knocked out cold very quick. There's a couple other ones that he knocked out cold very quickly. And DDP, although he throws a weird style, I don't think he holds the advantage in technical striking here. Maybe overall striking because of his weird approach, but I have to give it to Khamzat. And I think what really tipped me in that scale was I saw a video of Khabib breaking it down. He was like, if I'm Khamzat, I'm standing and fighting for the first 2 rounds and seeing how I could handle, DDP's approaches and his attacks. Once he gets to the ground, I think Khamzat clearly holds that advantage. And what's really concerning is the gas tank. How long can Khamzat fight 5 rounds for at the high level, at the high volume and the high pace that DDP fights? In my eyes, this fight goes one of 2 ways. It's Khamzat rushing it and getting him out within the first 3 rounds, or he can't get him out and we see a DDP take over and potentially get a finish in the later rounds. I just think this is what we've been waiting for. I think Khamzat's going to rise to the occasion. I think he's going to get this done. I think he's going to sub him early within the first 3 rounds. And I think we're going to have a reign at this weight class for a while. I don't know who really has the repertoire to beat him. And the last thing before I pass this on to one of you, I don't know if you guys saw the video of them meeting backstage today, but Khamzat looked freaking huge compared to DDP, which is a crazy thing to say. I know they're in the middle of cutting weight, but he just looks so much bigger than him because DDP is known as the bigger guy in this division. So that kind of further pushed me into the direction for Khamzat. That's my pick. I think I might be opposed throughout here, but let's see what you guys have to say.
Luke, I will say, and I'm thinking now, I was going to lean Khamzat in this one before we even started the pod. But I'm thinking now, as you mentioned, Dricus' weird fighting style, and I hadn't really put this together. It's like, I think Khamzat might be one of the only guys in this division that if DDP leans in with his head down, winging punches, I think Khamzat's the only guy in this division that would actually just charge forward and blast double leg him. And I have a feeling that, and Zach, you touched on cardio. I think Khamzat, he's been training for 3-round fights. Now he's finally training for a 5. He knows, you have to know, like, he's not that fucking stupid to where he's just gonna blow his load in the first round. You can't. He like DDP like isn't the type of fighter. He's not the high caliber type of fighter to where like just ragdolling him the way you see him do to Kevin Holland, some of these guys in the regional scene, some of these guys when he first made his UFC debut, where you can just actually manhandle them throughout the entire first round, and you have them. They can't hang with you on the ground, and you're just eventually going to find that submission within round 1. So you don't have to pace yourself. And I think that just shows that just goes to show how dominant Khamzat really is in terms of his wrestling ability. And, more impressively is when he did it to Robert Whitaker, a guy who's seen all of that and was able to just get him out of there in the first round. Minus the injury that Robert Whitaker had faced, early in his career and pushing his teeth back, he was ragdolling him. He was ragdolling Kamaru Usman, even though he moved up a weight class. Usman's a big welterweight, fought him on 10 days' notice, but Usman, you don't lose your ability to wrestle. And Usman was getting ragdolled by Khamzat in that first round. I think if Khamzat paces himself and DDP starts going for those wild winging punches, Khamzat will just be able to comfortably take him down in that vulnerable state and, let it go round by round, if not find the finish. But I think he could actually win a decision here now that I think about it. I'm going Khamzat. I think he does it like his previous fights where he just goes out, ragdolls DDP and gets him out there in 1 or 2 rounds. But I could also see him winning a decision now.
Yeah, I'm on the other side here. I got DDP by blowing the biggest load ever, man, or falling piano, or comically large hammer. Whatever you want to say, man. He's like a Looney Tunes character out there. But in all seriousness, I think that definitely plays to his advantage, especially in Khamzat's training camp. How do you train and how do you take a camp for a guy like DDP that's so awkward? It's like a matchup against Rainer de Ritter, who's these are two guys that we're obviously comparing all the time just because they have such unorthodox and weird and untechnical styles. But with that said, I mean, I think DDP's takedown defense is spectacular. I think that's something that a lot of people are maybe overlooking just because of how good Khamzat's wrestling really is, and how he just has his way with every single fighter that steps in the ring with him or octagon with him. But I think DDP is the guy that can actually withstand those takedown defenses very well, and he has the gas tank to do it for a 5-round fight. And he's been fighting 5-round fights, for a decent amount of his career, being that he's so new to the UFC. So I think, DDP's just got everything. And, on another note, on that, takedown defense note, I've seen videos of DDP training, and there's like 6 dudes trying to take him down, in wrestling. They're not even throwing punches or anything, and they can't even get him off his feet. This dude's feet are planted, and these are, 5-6 professional fighters trying to take down one DDP, and they can't even get him to move. I mean, he's standing there like a statue. I just think like that talks so much. I mean, sure, one guy can't take you down. That's believable, right? But 5-6 guys trying to take you down actively, and they're all professional. It's not going to happen. Maybe a pause on that one. But DDP's,
where they circled around him too, and it's just DDP in the middle.
You just circle them all around.
Bonnie Blue.
Everywhere, dude. And DDP survived that, bro. And DDP survived that. But I seriously think DDP's got a very good chance. I think this line is kind of crazy. I'm getting some Francis Ngannou and Gain flashbacks right now when Ngannou was plus 190 against Gain in their fight as well. So I don't know. All signs point to DDP for me. I think Khamzat is definitely going to be a champion at some point. But I don't think it's going to be this fight. I think there's a very, very good chance that DDP can just survive those crazy takedown attempts. He's definitely preparing very well. He's always very well prepared. He's got a really good game plan for every single fighter he picks. And Chimaev is a guy that, likes to get crazy early on in the fight. If he can survive that, DDP's got a very good chance of just wearing him down, putting the pause on him, and getting that decision win.
Yeah, I like the spot that we're in right now because I'm siding with Khamzat Chimaev, and while San does hold the lead off of picks taken thus far, you see the graphics put out. In main events, when it's 3 against 1, it's just absolute bully ball. You look recently with Fluffy against Roman Dolidze, we got that one. RDR Whitaker, we got that one. Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier. So I will say in these main events, I feel pretty good being on the side of 3-1, and I want to get one back on you here, San. But my reason being, first off, you want to touch on the wrestling here. DDP's background is in Greco-Roman wrestling, which is only from the waist up. Nothing to do with legs and whatnot. And that's where he was Olympic hopeful, I believe, for South Africa. Khamzat Chimaev, you see how he takes people down. He takes them down just double legs from the open, like traditional wrestling, single legs from the open, has a lot of success with it. You look at DDP, he was taken down by Robert Whitaker by what? Like a double leg from the open. So I think Khamzat Chimaev, his openings will be there as far as the wrestling goes. And to be honest, his wrestling is just undeniable, especially early in fights. You look at Kamaru Usman, who is one of the best wrestlers to step foot in the octagon, like truly best, one of the best. And he took him down whenever he wanted to and just held the advantages there. He did it in the first round. He did it in the second round. He did it in the third round. I do think DDP at plus 190 is very good value. So from a bettor's perspective, I would probably lean on the side of DDP at plus 190. But I think Khamzat's wrestling will be able to win him a few rounds at least. And I think Khamzat will still be competitive in the later rounds. We talk about his camp and what he's doing to prepare. He's going to go and be the same Khamzat Chimaev. He's not going to cater his game to anyone. What he is doing is ensuring that his gas tank is in peak maximum condition when he's out there in California training with Coach Cal, who is known to just put you through the absolute ringer. Guys go out there and they say, that was the worst thing I've ever done. It's just so cardio intense. And I think Khamzat Chimaev is sitting there being like, you know what? I'm going to be prepared to go all 5, even if I don't have to. And I'm going to make sure I do not lose this fight on the grounds of cardio. But with that being said, not everyone like physically does have the gas tank to go 5, and Khamzat Chimaev has not done it. So we shall see what happens in the later rounds, but I am leaning Khamzat Chimaev. And with all that being said, we are going to welcome in Dan, who is going to – I'm going to remove myself, but oh, geez. I'll remove myself, or actually – Ron, you ever remove? I'll remove Son. Let's add in Dan. We're going to put Dan on the big screen here to go and talk about this fight. Dan, welcome on.
Thank you, man. Wow, you really give me quite the intro there, like that breakdown you did, like word for word, bar for bar. But I think when crafting notes for this fight, I don't know if any of you guys have seen Oppenheimer, but there's a great line from the movie where he's like, it's paradoxical, but yet it works. That's exactly what it's like to watch Dricus du Plessis. We've all seen how awkward he is. Everybody wants to make, like the Looney Tunes, Wile E. Coyote jokes, whatever it is, but yet it works. And I don't even think DDP himself somewhat knows why it works. He just kind of, in interviews, he's just like, hey, I don't really think about it too much. It just seems to work for me. But going into the notes for this fight, I am going to favor Khamzat Chimaev very slightly. I think there is a world where DDP's versatility and cardio and just overall durability just outlasts Khamzat in a way he has not seen before. First off, just a couple notes for each fighter before I get into the predictions. I'll try and keep it as concise as I can. Obviously, we know that Khamzat's more of a grapple-heavy fighter. I think what might get him into trouble on the feet with Dricus du Plessis is that he's not too much of a volume striker. He's not really a guy that's going to throw a ton of combinations unless he has you trapped against the fence or something like that. And that might get him into some precarious situations if it does remain on the feet in the later rounds where, maybe he starts to tire, maybe DDP starts to walk him down, maybe he starts to use that more versatile striking to his advantage to kind of pick Khamzat apart and get ahead of him, at least on points. I think DDP, although he still looks a little bit goofy, he's definitely improved immeasurably from the beginning of his career to now. This last fight we saw against Sean Strickland, he still looks a little goofy, but he looks more polished. He looks more precise. He doesn't look all over the place. He doesn't swing for the bleachers quite as much. He keeps his chin down a little bit more and he keeps his hands up a little bit higher. He does use that high guard particularly well. The high guard, obviously, it's far from flawless. You leave yourself vulnerable to looping shots that go around the high guard in front of the face, so you can't stay there too long or else you're going to be a mess. But he's good enough with his defense to mitigate just enough damage to the point where he can counter his own strikes, which is where you see a lot of guys get into trouble with the exchanges. His durability, along with his use of the high guard, at least how he uses it, allows him to survive long enough to throw some offense back and usually get the better of the exchanges. He mixes in takedowns really well, surprisingly, and he doesn't even really need to set it up that well. All he needs to do is get a hold of an ankle, and it just seems to work. I think he did that against Darren Till. I believe he did that against Robert Whitaker at least once. But in terms of the actual predictions, give me 1 second. I think what Khamzat brings to the table that a lot of the other fighters don't is that they kind of make it a sport more so than a brawl, right? Like some of them are, in particular, Izzy and maybe Rob Whitaker. Not that they're trying to point fight or anything like that, but they're not really trying to charge in and get their hands dirty, especially with a guy as dangerous as DDP. And I don't think Khamzat, that's really an issue for him. I think that's a guy that's going to press forward, that's going to put paws on you, that's going to try and finish the fight. And it might be his undoing. Maybe he wastes all his energy in the beginning. Who knows? But I think Khamzat certainly presents something different that DDP has not seen before. He's not going to coast. He's not going to stay on the outside and pick you apart. I don't even think he's really going to use that much strategy. That guy just wants to go in and smash you as quickly as possible. Pause. But that's how he fights. I really don't think you're going to see too much strategy with him. He can knock Dricus du Plessis out on the feet, of course, but I don't think it's going to be an issue of technique. I think it's just going to be a matter of who lands cleaner, who lands harder until Khamzat can get a takedown. So I think in terms of the grappling, Khamzat's grappling is something that Dricus has not seen before. And I'm not saying Dricus is a slouch by any means in that department. He just has not faced a wrestler that's as dominant as Khamzat. I think the closest he faced was Derek Brunson way back. But like you said, Zach, Dricus has been taken down before by Rob Whittaker. He has been taken down before by Derek Brunson. And I don't think it's because he does have good takedown defense. He can get back up to his feet. I think it's that he doesn't really mind as much as if he's taken down because he has a lot of faith in his ability to get back up to his feet. And he does this really well. He doesn't get really held down that much. And I think it's because his prior opponents have not been able to maintain control on him. And this is where Khamzat really excels, is the transitional grappling. This is his bread and butter. I think Dricus's prior opponents give him openings that Khamzat simply will not give him. Like against Derek Brunson, he was able to kind of peek out the back door and escape that rear naked choke attempt. Against Robert Whittaker, I think Rob had a guillotine grip on him that Dricus was able to exploit and reverse. Khamzat is just like a wet blanket in the worst possible way. He's hanging all over you. He's dragging you down to the floor. He's using the Dagestani handcuff to trap your arms. Then he's hooking the legs so you can't get away. And he's putting all his body weight on you. Even I was watching Volkanovski talk about it. Even Khamzat's even using his head as a lever to keep his opponent in place. So it's not something that that Dricus has really faced too much. And I don't think Khamzat's going to be able to give him those openings to exploit. I think it's going to be like a glue trap if he can get a hold of him, if he can keep him down, if he can finish him early. If he can't do that, then that's a completely different issue. I also think that DDP's high guard is going to get him into trouble a little bit because it takes his hands away from his hips. A lot of times when he blocks shots, you see his torso moving every which way. And that's something that Khamzat's going to be able to use to get a hold of him and take him down. You already see Khamzat shooting from space, like shooting a takedown off of his jab, like shooting a takedown when his opponent misses with a strike. If DDP is covering up and has his hands far away from his hips, that's like the world is your oyster from that point. So I think that's something he could definitely take advantage of. I think with Chimaev too, something that people do a lot that I really don't like is they kind of cherry pick in order to discredit him, right? And I'll be the first to admit he's far from invincible, but you saw people do this with Ilia Topuria too. People kept bringing up the Jai Herbert thing. Like he almost got knocked out by Jai Herbert. Therefore, when he goes up to lightweight, oh my God, who knows what's going to happen? People do something similar to Khamzat, the Burns fight from 4 years ago? Oh, they're just looking for a moment where he looks vulnerable in order to discredit him entirely. You saw people do that with Khabib too. Oh, he lost one round against Conor. The world is ending. I mean, I just think it goes to show the guy is so dominant that if you have to grasp for straws in order to excuse how good of a fighter he is, I mean, not saying he can't be beaten. He's been cracked before. He's, let his ego get away with him a little bit. But I think based on the last few fights we've seen, even with Kamaru Usman, he was dominating that fight up until he injured his hand. And again, not an excuse. It could happen again. But I think based on his last couple fights, based on what we've seen, unless Dricus is able to outlast him, and unless Khamzat, kind of plays Dricus's game in Toon World or whatever it is, I think I could see him finishing it more likely than not.
Yeah, very well said, Dan. I like a lot of the points you made there, and that was very insightful. Appreciate you coming on and sharing some insight, and I'm excited to read the article when it does come out. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dan.
Appreciate you guys. Have a good one.
Awesome.
And with that being said, we are adding Son back onto the stage.
Big Son.
What's up, fellas?
Thank you, boys, for taking the time to tune in. That was an awesome pod, and I'm excited for this card this upcoming weekend. It's going to be an absolute banger.
Sir.
Yep.
Bro, tell me you guys are
You're
leaking.
still recording.